Fatima Ali. I was born and raised in Montreal. My parents are also Canadian. My father was born here in Montreal. My mother was born in Nova Scotia. And from her side of the family, they've been here for many generations. And her great-great-grandfather was Micmac Indian. So we have a long history here in Canada. My upbringing was pretty normal. I mean, nothing abnormal out of the ordinary. Grew up with both my parents. Was myself, and I had two brothers. My parents, both of them worked, and I went to school here. I started off in elementary school in French, and then I migrated. Went into French immersion. Then as I got into high school, I was in English, and so I have a bilingual background, French and English, being here in Quebec. But I had a normal childhood, and probably a very loving family, very warm family, close in many ways, but also, you know, individualistic as well, you know, not enmeshed family. Very comical family, loves to laugh, like to joke around, you know, it's extended on my mother's side and my father's side. Like to be together. And I also had, and there is a religious, you know, hint at them. Not very, very strict, like super religious, but belief in God is there. And it's actually the way that my parents raised me, the values that they raised me with, is what actually made it easy for me to accept Islam, because of the way they raised me. Yeah. Yeah, my parents were a family as Protestant. Yeah, and my father's mother, she was the matriarch of the family, and she was, I think, the one who was very instrumental in keeping people, the family, if you want to say religious or church-focused or God-focused, because for her, she always focused on God, and she had a particular connection with me, you know, and also on my mother's side, they're very, very, very community-oriented family, very religious. At least my mother's mother and her immediate family, her uncles and things like that in their community in Nova Scotia. You know, God was always present. Yeah. Yes, when I was growing up, my mother, whatever she would do, because she was very active in the Black community. So from the time we were young, even if we weren't helping out, we would always be involved or always be present in whatever she was doing. And as we grew up, her and a friend of hers, they established a Black community association in the West Island, and we did a lot of volunteer work there. And that's actually how I started doing more volunteer work with the youth. So there's always been this sense of giving back to the community in our family. My relationship with the Bible, I would say it's probably not so good, or probably kind of weak. You know, the basic things, but I wasn't one to pick up the Bible and read it. I can't tell you, like, I've read the Bible through and through and can quote different books and chapters to you. So my relationship was so-so. But when I think back over my life, I can't actually pinpoint having ever truly believed that Jesus was the Son of God. I mean, that's one thing through my own personal reflections. I always think that I'd never actually accepted that belief or that notion. I never really pursued it. It was after my grandmother passed away and we moved out into the West Island. We weren't going to church as much, so although, you know, there was always, if you want to say religious, it wasn't like so much practicing, but it was always like the belief in God was there, but there wasn't this like hardcore belief that you have to accept Jesus as your personal savior, otherwise, you know, you won't have salvation or things like that. It was just always religious in the sense that, you know, you don't blaspheme God or say anything negative against God. The belief was always there, but my parents weren't like strict Christians. It's just that we were raised with particular values and beliefs, and God was always there. I didn't really know so much about Islam before I converted, not really. I do remember one time when I was a child, was after the revolution in Iran. I remember seeing Ayatollah Khomeini's picture on the front of Time magazine. And because he has such a powerful presence and his face is so overwhelming, I remember getting nervous, and I remember asking my dad, like, is he coming to Canada? Is he coming like to Montreal? Is he going to be here in our parking lot where we live? My dad was like, no, no. Like, what are you talking about? No. And I was like, okay. And then, subhanAllah, as I got older, following this path, then actually had an admiration for the Ayatollah. So it's interesting how Allah flips things for you during your life. I was my brother started giving me information about Black history when I was much younger. And from then I started doing a lot of research about into African history, Black history, especially in North America. And I eventually, finally came across the autobiography of Malcolm X. And when I was reading his autobiography, that's how the spark started. It was really when I got to the end of the book, when he started talking about having made his pilgrimage, that was the spark. That was the actual spark that took off for me. And then I took a course in university. I had a break. I was doing my schedule for my university, and I had a break on Tuesday and Thursday from like 1 to 2:30, and I was looking through the course book for something to fill the break, and there was a religion class on Islam at the exact time, so I took the class, and that's what helped me to continue my research. For my research, I took this one class in university, and I had also met my sister-in-law's brother, who was friends with somebody who happened to be Muslim. And long story short, we started talking, and then I was asking him about the Nation of Islam and what was the big difference between the Nation of Islam and, let's say, mainstream Islam. So he started explaining things to me, and he said, if you want to know about Islam, he says, I can introduce you to some brothers who can give you some more information. And I met those people, and they spent time with me, and they answered a lot of my questions. And then one of the brothers gave me the book, Then I Was Guided. And so I read that book, and I was very interested in it. I didn't understand everything, obviously, because I didn't really understand the difference between Sunni and Shia and what was going on, but I understood the basic premise that was happening throughout the book. And from there, I continued reading, doing more research. But even with the class that I was taking in university, I said there's something missing. The teacher wasn't Muslim. She was of another faith, and the teacher assistant was from another country. And I said, there's something that's, the way they're portraying Islam, I said, there's something that's missing. And then at the same time, my brother was working in Saudi Arabia, and he was coming home for Christmas, and he said to me, he says, I'm coming back for the holidays. He says, do you want me to bring you anything? I said, bring me a Quran. He said, you sure? I said, yeah, just bring me a Quran. Just bring me, that's all I want. So he brought that home, and I looked through it quickly, and then I just put it on my shelf. So that was Christmas time. And then, I continued reading, continued doing research. And then that June, I took the Quran off the shelf, and I read the introduction, which is actually a poetic form of the life of Prophet Muhammad. And after I read that poem, I said, that's it, I'm going to become Muslim. So that was it, that's what did it for me. My mother, she knew that I was investigating or looking to Islam. And this same brother who had given me the book, Then I Was Guided, I actually invited him over to come and speak to my parents to try and answer some of their questions. My dad didn't join the conversation, he just stayed in the living room. But he sat and spoke with my mom for several hours and answered questions for her. So she knew I was on this path, that I was looking into Islam. And when I actually took my Shahada, I told her about a week later, And then she said, I wish you would have told me, like I would have liked to have been there, you know? And I said, I wanted to invite you because I actually took my Shahada outside in the park with these few brothers. So they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do it in the park. So it was like 4 of them with me, and I recited the Shahada. And my mom said, I would have come. And I said, I wanted to invite you, but I had a 5% doubt that maybe you would try to change my mind at the last minute. So I said, that's why I didn't ask you to come. I said, but otherwise it would have been nice to have you there. But that was basically what occurred during my Shahada. No, I actually started developing a relationship with the hijab before I converted. It was in a different form as I started wrapping my head and wearing like African style wraps, and then I started wearing longer clothes. And I did that throughout the year while I was doing my research. So then by the time I actually took my Shahada, I started wearing hijab, better, more properly, but it was still a process that I had to go through. Misconceptions about hijab? I had questions, but but I don't think I had misconceptions. I just had questions because I was so inquisitive about so many different things. And I needed logical answers, not just whatever people wanted to tell me. So when I took my Shahada, it was in the summertime. So to be able to cover with long sleeves and long clothes in the summertime, it was difficult to find clothing. And this notion of things have to be to the wrist and it has to be loose and flowing. So it took me a while to get through that and then to understand why it is that the hijab for the men is different from that for women. But once things are explained to you, it fell into place. I actually, 2 months after I converted, I had an incident with some Muslims whereby I told myself that I don't want to have anything to do with this if this is what Islam is about, because of that incident that I had with those people. And something held me back and said, instead of just giving up and letting go because of those people and their behavior, why don't you try and stick it out and continue with it and then see what happens? So that's the path I took. I said, okay, I'll try and stick it out. So that was probably one of the biggest things, because those people were helpful in me converting to Islam, and then this situation took place, and then it made me doubt whether I wanted to stay as a Muslim. Alhamdulillah, I made a dua and I asked Allah to bring me some sincere people, somebody I could have as some friends, and then probably within the month, Allah brought me people and people, and since then He just kept bringing me more and more and more people. So alhamdulillah, He definitely responded to my dua. I think the most difficult thing, I guess maybe from a practical, or as far as a practical daily situation, was the modification of eating habits. So, getting halal food, understanding that, different ingredients could be pork ingredients, have different names, and to understand what this list is and understand what it is that you have to look for as far as food labeling and all these things that you didn't necessarily pay attention to. So now there was so much of attention on what you're eating and what you're ingesting that before this wasn't a question, it wasn't an issue. So making this modification and then trying to explain to your family why you can't have anything that has alcohol in it, or pork, or it can't be non-halal meat. That was one change. Obviously the clothing, having changes with the clothing, changing your style of dress. But I think one of the most difficult things that myself, and not myself alone, faces as somebody who converts to Islam is unfortunately dealing with the Muslim community and the lack of reception or the lack of inclusion that you have from them, their misconceptions about you, their perspectives about you, and I really think that probably the most difficult thing is the Muslim community in and of itself, which is unfortunate that sometimes you get more support from Christians and other people than you do from people who have the same school of thought and the same ummah as you.